Stop watching, stop consuming, stop waiting for permission. Right now, the most dangerous, most successful people in your life aren't the ones talking the loudest. They're the ones saying nothing at all. They've mastered something most people will never understand: silent discipline. That's the quiet power to control your emotions, dominate your environment, and build a life of unshakable calm without ever needing to explain yourself. And if you're ready to join them, you're in the right place. This is the silent discipline. Let's go. Chapter 1. The Power of Saying Nothing. Let me start with something that will seem counterintuitive. The most powerful person in any room is rarely the one talking the most. In fact, I'd argue the opposite is true. The person who talks the least, who speaks with intention, who knows when to stay silent, that's the person with the real power. Think about the most successful people you know. Think hard. The CEO who closed the billion-dollar deal, the entrepreneur who built something from nothing, the person in your life who seems to operate at a different level of calm and control. What do? Do they talk constantly? Do they dominate every conversation? Do they need to explain themselves? No, they don't. What they do instead is speak rarely. And when they do speak, people listen. Every word carries weight. Every statement matters. There's no filler, no justification, no need to convince anyone of anything. They're not trying to prove themselves. They've already proven themselves. And that's the distinction you need to understand. We've been conditioned to believe that talking equals influence. If you speak, you'll be heard. If you're heard, you'll be respected. If you're respected, you'll be successful. That's backwards. That's the formula from mediocrity. The real formula is the opposite. Silence creates intrigue. Intrigue creates curiosity. Curiosity creates respect. And respect creates real influence. The person who doesn't talk much becomes the person everyone wants to understand. That's power. I want you to consider the data for a moment. Research shows that in high-performing teams and organizations, the leaders who speak the least actually have the most influence. They listen more. They speak less. But when they do speak, the room stops. Everybody leans in. This isn't coincidence. This is a principle. The principle is this: scarcity creates value. If you talk all the time, your words become worthless. They're everywhere. Nobody has to listen closely because there's always another one coming. But if you're selective, if you make every word count, then your words become currency. And currency can be spent strategically. Think about the last time someone you respect said something unexpected. Maybe they were usually quiet, and suddenly they made a comment. Didn't it hit different? Didn't you pay more attention? Didn't it feel more important? That's not because what they said was necessarily profound. It's because it was rare. Rarity commands attention. Now let me ask you something harder. How much of your day do you spend talking when you could be listening? How many conversations do you dominate when you could be learning? How many times do you explain yourself when you could simply let people wonder? Most people can't sit in silence. The discomfort is too intense. When there's a pause in conversation, they fill it immediately. When someone challenges them, they defend instantly. When they're uncertain, they talk their way through it. All of this is a sign of weakness, not strength. The person with true discipline, they sit comfortably in silence. Someone makes an accusation, and they don't respond. Someone challenges them, and they don't explain. Someone gossips about them, and they're already 3 moves ahead, unbothered, unmoved, unchanged. This is what I call silent discipline, and it's the foundation of everything else in this book. Here's what happens when you master the power of saying nothing. People project onto your silence. They fill the gap with their own imagination. They wonder what you're thinking. They guess about your next move. And their imagination, their wonder, their uncertainty about you, becomes more powerful than any explanation you could offer. You become mysterious. You become unpredictable. You become dangerous. And dangerous people command respect. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine you're in a negotiation. You make an offer. The other person comes back with a lower number. A typical person immediately starts defending their price, explaining why it's worth it, justifying their position. They're talking because they're uncomfortable. They're selling because they're afraid. But the disciplined person? They say nothing. They let the other person sit in the silence. And that silence is deafening. It communicates without words. I'm not desperate. I'm not concerned. I'm willing to walk away. The silence becomes negotiating leverage. The silence does the work. Or think about this. Someone makes a comment designed to provoke you. Maybe it's a criticism. Maybe it's a challenge. Maybe it's just meant to get a reaction. The instinctive response is to react, to defend, to attack, to explain why they're wrong. But what if you just looked at them calmly and said nothing? What if you simply acknowledged them with a nod and moved on? That person would be far more unsettled than if you'd engaged. They were looking for a fight. You gave them ice. That ice is power. I want to be clear about something. Saying nothing isn't about being rude or dismissive. It's not about ignoring people or creating distance. It's about being so grounded, so certain, so disciplined that you don't need external validation through talking. You don't need to prove anything because your results already have. The wealthy stay silent about their net worth. The talented stay silent about their abilities. The accomplished stay silent about their wins. They let the evidence speak. And by staying silent, they avoid jealousy, sabotage, and unnecessary conflict. Meanwhile, the person who talks about everything, they've just given everybody access to their insecurities, their plans, their fears. They've painted a target on themselves. They've given competitors intelligence. They've weakened their position before they've even started. Silent discipline is an information advantage. When you're quiet, you're observing, you're learning, you're gathering intelligence about people's motivations, their fears, their weaknesses. While they're performing for you, you're studying them. That information becomes power. This is the fundamental shift you need to make. Stop believing that you need to be heard to be powerful. You don't. You need to be heard only when it matters, only when it's strategic, only when it advances your position. Everything else is noise, and the world has enough noise. When you remove your noise from the equation, you become remarkable. Not by doing something extraordinary, just by doing less, by saying less, by letting your actions, your results, your calm and your composure do the talking for you. The power of saying nothing isn't about silence for silence's sake. It's about understanding that your words are limited. You have maybe 5,000 to 10,000 words worth of real impact in your life. Once you spend them, they're gone. The question is, will you waste them explaining yourself, defending your choices, and seeking validation? Or will you save them for moments that actually matter? The disciplined person understands this economy. They budget their words like a CEO budgets capital. And that's why they always seem to have more leverage, more respect, and more power. That's the first principle. Master the power of saying nothing, and everything else becomes possible. Now that you understand the paradox of silence, we need to talk about what's probably sabotaging you every single day without you even realizing it. We need to talk about your reactions. Because every reaction you make is a choice to give away your power. And most people are giving it away constantly. Let's move to Chapter 2. Why your reactions are costing you everything. Chapter 2. Why your reactions are costing you everything. Here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. Your reactions are your weakness. Every single time you react, emotionally, defensively, impulsively, you're giving someone else control over your life. And most people are doing this dozens of times every day. You believe your emotions are automatic. You believe that when something happens, you're hardwired to respond a certain way. That's not true. That's the lie you've been telling yourself. Your emotions aren't automatic. They're choices. And most of the time, you're making the wrong choice without even realizing it. Let me explain how this works. Something happens. Someone says something critical. You get rejected. You experience failure. Your first instinct is to react. You get defensive. You get angry. You get hurt. You explain yourself. You justify your position. You fight back. And in that moment, you've just given away all of your power. The person who remains calm, the person who doesn't react, they've kept their power. They've maintained control. While you're spiraling emotionally, they're 3 steps ahead, thinking clearly, strategizing, planning the next move. That's the difference between winners and losers. Think about what happens physiologically when you react emotionally. Your cortisol spikes. Your blood pressure rises. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational decision-making, actually shuts down. You literally become less intelligent in that moment. Your IQ drops. Your ability to think strategically vanishes. And you're making decisions from a place of pure emotion and survival instinct. Now think about that person who doesn't react. Their cortisol stays stable. Their nervous system remains calm. Their prefrontal cortex stays online. They're thinking clearly while you're losing your mind. Who do you think makes better decisions? Who do you think wins? The answer is obvious. The person who controls their reactions wins every single time. And here's the thing that most people miss. This isn't about suppressing your emotions. This isn't about not feeling anything. The most disciplined people in the world feel deeply. They experience intense emotion. But they've learned to feel it internally while maintaining external composure. That's the skill. That's the discipline. You feel the anger, but you don't express it. You feel the hurt, but you don't show it. You feel the fear, but you don't run. You sit with the discomfort internally while remaining completely calm externally. That's where the power is. Let me give you some real-world examples. You're in a business meeting. Your idea gets shot down by someone in the room. Your first instinct is to defend it, to explain why they're wrong, to prove that you're right. That's the reactive person. They immediately jump in, start talking, start defending. But the disciplined person? They sit in silence. They absorb the criticism. They think about whether there's any truth to it. They don't react. They don't defend. They don't need to. And you know what happens? That disciplined person is the one who gets promoted. Because leaders need people who can handle criticism without falling apart. Or think about this scenario. Someone betrays you. Someone breaks your trust. You find out through the grapevine. Your first impulse is to confront them immediately, to tell them off, to cut them off, to have a big emotional scene. That's reactivity. But the quiet, disciplined person? They sit with it. They think about what they actually want to accomplish. Do they want to blow off steam? Or do they want to protect themselves? If they want to protect themselves, they don't react in anger. They simply create distance. They don't explain why. They don't make it a dramatic moment. They just systematically extract that person from their life. And that person never sees it coming. That's power. Now I want you to think about the costs of your reactivity. Every time you react emotionally, you're creating tells. You're showing people your buttons. You're showing them how to manipulate you.
You're showing them your weaknesses. In negotiations, your reactivity costs you money. If someone makes an offer and you react emotionally by defending your position, they know they've gotten to you. You've just revealed that you're eager, that you're nervous, that you need this deal. That information is worth millions. In relationships, your reactivity creates conflict. You react with anger, the other person reacts with defensiveness, and suddenly you're in a spiral. But if you don't react, if you remain calm and composed, the other person has nothing to push against. The conflict collapses. In business, your reactivity makes you unpredictable and unreliable. If you're making decisions based on your emotions instead of strategy, nobody can depend on you. But if you're calm and strategic, you become someone people can build with. Your reactivity is also draining. It's exhausting. Every emotional reaction takes energy. It keeps you stuck in problems instead of moving forward. It makes you lose sleep. It makes you ruminate. Meanwhile, the person who doesn't react, they're calm, they're rested, they're focused, they're moving forward. Here's the mechanism I want you to understand. Between what happens and how you respond, there's a gap. That gap is where your power lives. Most people have a gap of maybe half a second. Something happens, and they immediately react. They've got no space, no time, no ability to choose. But disciplined person, they've expanded that gap to 3, 4, 5 seconds, maybe longer. In that gap, they take a breath. They pause. They observe. They ask themselves, what is actually happening here? What do I want to accomplish? What's the best response? By the time they respond, they're responding from a place of intention, not impulse, from strategy, not emotion. This is something you can train. This gap isn't fixed. You can expand it. Right now, if you practice, you can take 1 extra second to pause before responding. That 1 second is already more than most people have. Tomorrow, you can take 2 seconds. Next week, 3 seconds. Over months, you can build a gap so large that you're operating in a completely different realm than reactive people. That's the difference between someone who has 2 reactions and someone with 10 reactions. It's not that the disciplined person never feels triggered. It's that they've expanded their gap so much that most triggers don't even produce a reaction. I want you to think about the people you respect most. Think about their composure. Think about how they handle pressure. Do they seem flustered? Do they seem desperate? Do they explain themselves constantly? No. They seem calm. They seem unbothered. They seem certain. That's not because their lives are easier or their problems are smaller. It's because they've mastered their reactions. They've learned to feel without reacting. They've expanded their gap. They've chosen discipline. And here's what that discipline costs them. Short-term comfort. In the moment, it's uncomfortable to sit with your emotions without reacting. It's uncomfortable to feel angry and not express it. It's uncomfortable to feel hurt and not defend yourself. It's uncomfortable to sit in silence when every part of you wants to talk. But the cost of not having discipline, that's even higher. That costs you your life. It costs you your relationships. It costs you your career. It costs you your respect. It costs you everything. So the question is, are you willing to be uncomfortable for a few seconds, a few minutes, maybe a few hours, so that you can be powerful for the rest of your life? That's the trade. That's the deal. Most people aren't willing to make that trade. They want comfort now, so they react, so they lose power, so they stay stuck. And 10 years later, they look back and wonder why nothing changed. They wonder why the same problems keep happening. They wonder why they never win. But you're different. You're willing to feel the discomfort. You're willing to expand your gap. You're willing to master your reactions. And that's going to change everything. Because once you stop reacting, once you start responding strategically, once you've mastered your emotional impulses, you become unstoppable. You become the person who stays calm in chaos. You become the person who thinks clearly under pressure. You become the person everyone respects. That's power. Now that you understand how your reactions are sabotaging you, we need to talk about where these reactions come from. We need to talk about what happens when you sit with discomfort instead of running from it, because that's where real discipline is built. Let's move to Chapter 3, The Discipline of Discomfort, Sitting with What Hurts. Chapter 3, The Discipline of Discomfort, Sitting with What Hurts. This chapter is about one of the most difficult and most important skills you'll ever develop. It's the ability to sit with discomfort, not to fix it, not to run from it, not to fill it with noise or distraction, but to actually sit with it. Most of your life is built on avoidance. You avoid pain, you avoid rejection, you avoid uncertainty, you avoid failure. And the primary way you avoid all of these things is by talking, by distracting yourself, by filling the void with noise. When you feel lonely, you reach for your phone. When you feel anxious, you talk to someone. When you feel uncertainty, you seek reassurance. When you feel fear, you distract yourself with work. You're constantly running from discomfort. But here's the truth. That running is what's keeping you small. That avoidance is what's keeping you stuck. Every time you run from discomfort, you're teaching yourself that you're not capable of handling it. You're teaching yourself that you're weak. You're teaching yourself that you need someone else to rescue you. The person who builds real discipline is the person who stops running, the person who sits down and says, I'm going to feel this. I'm going to sit with this discomfort, and I'm going to figure out that I can actually handle it. Let me give you an example. You experience rejection. Someone says no to you. Your business idea gets rejected. You get rejected by someone you like. A client leaves. Your immediate instinct is to explain yourself, to convince them they're wrong, to fix it right now. But the disciplined person, they sit with the rejection. They don't immediately explain. They don't immediately try to convince. They sit with the feeling, and they discover something. The rejection doesn't kill them. The discomfort doesn't destroy them. They survive it. They can handle it. That discovery is massive because now they know, I don't need to fix this right away. I don't need to convince this person. I can sit in uncertainty and still be okay. And if you can sit in uncertainty and still be okay, you can do anything. This is where emotional maturity is developed, not in comfort, not in safety, but in the ability to feel intense emotion while maintaining composure. Children cry and scream when they're uncomfortable. Teenagers get defensive. Adults feel the pain and do what needs to be done. The shift from teenager to adult isn't about age. It's about the ability to sit with discomfort without reacting to it. Most people never make that shift. They stay in reactive teenager mode their entire lives. Think about it. How do people respond to criticism? Most people get defensive immediately. They're uncomfortable. Someone criticized them, so they attack back or explain themselves. They're trying to make the discomfort go away. But the mature person, they hear the criticism, they sit with it. They don't immediately respond. They ask themselves, is there truth in this? Can I learn something? And only after thinking about it do they respond. If there's value in it, they extract the value and move on. If there's no value, they discard it and move on. Either way, they've maintained their power. They've remained calm. They've demonstrated maturity. This skill is absolutely essential in high-stakes situations, in negotiations, in difficult conversations, in moments of crisis. The person who can sit with discomfort always has the advantage. I'll give you a specific example. You're in a difficult conversation with your partner or a family member. They just said something that hurts you. Your instinct is to hurt them back. Your instinct is to defend yourself. Your instinct is to make the discomfort go away immediately. But what if you just sat with it? What if you took a breath and said, that hurt. Let me think about what you said. And instead of reacting emotionally, you just sat with the discomfort and processed it. You might discover that what they said had truth in it. You might discover that they were trying to help you even though it hurt. You might discover something about yourself. And more importantly, you've just transformed that conversation from a conflict into a genuine connection. You've shown maturity. You've shown strength. You've shown the other person that you're secure enough to hear difficult things. That's power. Here's another example. You're afraid. You're starting something new. You're taking a risk. And the fear is intense. Your instinct is to distract yourself, to talk about it constantly, to seek reassurance, to convince yourself that you should do it differently, safer. But the disciplined person, they feel the fear, they acknowledge it, and they do it anyway. They sit with the fear and act despite it. And you know what they discover? Fear doesn't stop you. Fear is just a feeling. It's not a command. You can feel fear and move forward at the same time. This is the difference between someone who builds a business and someone who doesn't. It's not that the entrepreneur isn't scared. They're terrified, but they've learned to sit with the fear and build anyway. Once you've sat with discomfort enough times, once you've discovered that you can survive it, once you know that discomfort doesn't destroy you, everything changes. You become willing to do things that most people won't do because most people can't sit with discomfort. They can't sit with being alone. They can't sit with being unknown. They can't sit with being challenged. So they stay small. They stay safe and they stay stuck. But you're building the capacity to sit with anything, and that makes you dangerous. Now, there's a specific context where this skill becomes absolutely critical, and that's in high-pressure situations. Think about a surgeon performing emergency surgery. Think about a firefighter in a burning building. Think about a pilot dealing with an in-flight emergency. These people are experiencing intense discomfort, intense fear, but they're not reacting emotionally. They're not panicking. They're sitting with the discomfort and performing their job. That's discipline. That's the ability to feel and act despite how you feel. In your life, you're going to face moments like this. Maybe not a medical emergency or a burning building, but you'll face moments of high stakes and high pressure, and when you do, you'll want to panic. You'll want to react. You'll want to make the discomfort go away. But if you've trained yourself to sit with discomfort, if you've built that capacity, you'll do something different. You'll stay calm. You'll think clearly. You'll do what needs to be done. And you'll win. I want you to understand something fundamental about discomfort. It's not dangerous. It's not a signal that something is wrong. It's just a sensation. It's feedback from your nervous system that something is uncertain or threatening. But most of the things that are uncomfortable are not actually dangerous. Fear of public speaking isn't dangerous. It's just uncomfortable. Starting a new job isn't dangerous. It's just uncertain. Making a difficult decision isn't dangerous. It's just uncomfortable. But because we experience discomfort as if it's danger, we run from it. We avoid it. We stay small. And we never discover that we can actually handle it. The person who changes their life is the person who stops running from discomfort and starts sitting with it. They take a deep breath, they feel the feeling, and they do the thing anyway. This is how you build unshakable confidence, not by avoiding challenges, not by seeking comfort, but by facing challenges, sitting with discomfort, and discovering that you're more capable than you thought. Here's the discipline I want you to practice. The next time you feel discomfort, the next time you want to run or distract or explain or justify, I want you to pause. I want you to take a breath. I want you to sit with it for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds. Feel it fully. Don't try to change it. Don't try to fix it. Just feel it. You'll discover that it doesn't destroy you. You'll discover that you can handle it. And that discovery will expand your entire sense of what's possible. Do this enough times, and you'll build a capacity that most people never develop. You'll become someone who can sit in the fire and not burn. You'll become someone who can face anything because you've already faced the hardest thing, your own discomfort. Now that you understand the power of sitting with discomfort, we need to talk about what happens after you've mastered it. Because once you can sit with discomfort, you reach a point where you stop needing to prove anything. And that's when you become truly powerful. Let's move to Chapter 4. Stop proving. Start earning. Chapter 4. Stop proving. Start earning. One of the biggest energy drains in people's lives is this constant need to prove themselves, to prove they're smart, to prove they're competent, to prove they're worthy, to prove that they made the right decision, to prove that they're better than someone else. All of that proving, it's a sign of deep insecurity. and it's costing you everything. The person who needs to prove themselves is the person who doesn't believe in themselves. They're trying to convince others because they haven't convinced themselves. And that conviction comes through. People sense it. They feel that you're desperate, that you need their validation, and that desperation weakens your position. But the person who doesn't need to prove anything, that's a different energy altogether. That person has conviction. They're not trying to convince you. They're not trying to earn your respect. They already have it, or they don't care if they don't. Either way, they're not affected by your opinion. Think about someone you truly respect, someone who seems to operate at a different level. Do they try to convince you they're smart? Do they explain their decisions? Do they defend their choices? No. They just make decisions and move forward. They let their results speak. When you prove, you're reacting to someone else's doubt. You're letting their skepticism dictate your behavior. You're giving them power over you. When you earn, you're not reacting to anything. You're just moving forward. You're producing. You're building. Here's a specific example. You have an idea. You present it in a meeting. Someone shoots it down or questions it. Your instinct is to prove that you're right, to explain why they're wrong, to defend your idea. You're trying to convince them. But the person who has moved beyond the need to prove, they hear the objection. They either consider whether there's truth in it or they don't, and then they move on. They don't need to convince this person. They know their idea has merit, so they'll either implement it or they'll adjust it based on feedback. But they're not going to sit around defending it. And you know what happens? The person who just moves forward ends up being right way more often than the person who's desperately defending their position. Because the person who moves forward is thinking about what's actually true and what works. The person who's defending is thinking about their ego. This principle applies everywhere, in business, in relationships, in personal development, in everything. Let me give you another example. You're building a business. You're trying to get your first customers. Your instinct is to prove that your product is good, to convince people why they should buy it, to explain all the benefits, to overcome their objections. But the person who's beyond proving, they know their product works. So instead of proving, they give someone a trial. They let the person experience it. They let the results speak. If the product is good, it sells itself. If it's not, no amount of convincing will change that. So the disciplined business owner doesn't spend energy convincing. They spend energy building something worth buying. That's the difference between someone who succeeds and someone who stays stuck. Or think about relationships. You're dating someone. You really like them. Your instinct is to prove that you're a good partner, to show them how much you care, to explain why they should want to be with you, to convince them. But the person who's beyond that, they're just themselves. They're secure. They're not trying to convince anyone of their worth. And that security is attractive. People want to be around someone who's secure, someone who doesn't need their validation. So the person who stops proving, they actually attract better partners because they're operating from a place of strength instead of desperation. Now, I want to talk about something specific, the urge to explain yourself. This might be one of the most destructive urges you have. You make a decision. Someone questions it. Your instinct is to explain, to justify, to help them understand why you made that choice. But here's the truth. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone, not to your boss, not to your partner, not to your friends, not to anyone. If you made a decision, you made a decision. If it's the right one, the results will prove it. If it's the wrong one, you'll adjust, and the results will show that too. But your explanation doesn't change anything. Your justification doesn't matter. In fact, when you explain yourself, when you justify your choices, you're signaling weakness. You're signaling that you're not confident in your decision. You're inviting debate. You're inviting criticism. You're weakening your position. The strong person, they make a decision and they stand behind it. They don't explain. They don't justify. They just do. And they adjust as needed based on results, not based on other people's opinions. I want you to practice something. The next time someone questions a decision you made, instead of explaining, try just saying, I made that choice for a reason, or just, I stand by that decision, and then change the subject. See what happens. You'll discover that you don't actually need their approval. And once you don't need their approval, you're free. Here's another form of proving that's destroying people. The constant need to be right. Someone disagrees with you and your instinct is to prove that you're right and they're wrong. You get into arguments. You marshal evidence. You try to convince them. And you waste energy and damage relationships in the process. But the person who's beyond this, when someone disagrees, they're curious. They think, why do they think that? What do they know that I don't? What can I learn? And often that person learned something valuable. But even if they don't, they've maintained the relationship and preserved their energy. Because proving you're right is expensive. It costs you time. It costs you energy. It costs you relationships. And most of the time, it doesn't even work. The other person doesn't suddenly agree with you just because you had a better argument.
So the disciplined person lets it go. They don't need to be right. They're okay with someone disagreeing with them. And that freedom is one of the most powerful things you can experience. Now, let me be clear about something. I'm not saying you should never explain anything. I'm not saying you should never discuss your perspective. But there's a difference between sharing your perspective and trying to convince someone. One comes from a place of strength. I'm sharing what I think. Take it or leave it. The other comes from a place of weakness. Please agree with me. Please validate my thinking. Please prove that I'm right. One is about communication. The other is about seeking approval. Once you understand this distinction, you can shift. You can share your perspective confidently without needing them to agree. You can explain your decision clearly without needing them to think it was right. You can have a conversation without needing the other person to end up on your side. That shift is everything. Here's what happens when you stop proving and start earning. You have more energy. You're not wasting it trying to convince people. You're using it to actually do the work. You're building instead of defending. You're moving forward instead of going in circles. People respect you more because you're not desperate. You're not clingy. You're not needy. You're just solid. You're just doing the work. And that solidity is attractive. And most importantly, you stop being reactive. You stop letting other people's skepticism or doubt affect how you operate. You just do what you think is right and let the results speak. That's freedom. So here's the challenge I'm giving you. For the next week, notice every time you feel the urge to prove something. Notice every time you want to explain yourself. Notice every time you want to convince someone. And instead of doing it, see if you can just let it go. See if you can trust that the results will speak for themselves. Some of those will be hard. Some of those will feel uncomfortable. You'll feel like you should explain. You'll feel like they need to understand. But resist it, and watch what happens. You'll discover that the world doesn't actually need your explanation. You'll discover that your results speak louder than your words. And once you've discovered that, once you've built that trust in yourself and in your work,
you'll never go back to constantly proving. You'll have transcended that weakness. Now that you've learned to stop proving and start earning, we need to talk about the actual mechanism of how to maintain control in every situation. We need to talk about the architecture that makes all of this possible. Let's move to Chapter 5, the architecture of emotional control. Chapter 5, the architecture of emotional control. I want you to understand something fundamental. The goal isn't to feel nothing. The goal isn't to be a robot. The goal is to feel everything while maintaining your power. That's the distinction. The most disciplined people in the world experience intense emotion. They feel deeply. They care deeply. But they've built a system where their emotion doesn't control their actions, where what they feel internally doesn't dictate what they do externally. That's the architecture of emotional control, and it's learnable. Most people think it works like this. Something happens. They feel something. They act based on that feeling. End of story. Feeling equals action. But the disciplined person has inserted a gap. Something happens. They feel something. They pause. They observe the feeling. They choose a response. Then they act based on their choice, not their feeling. That pause, that gap, that's where all the power is. And the good news is, you can build that gap. You can expand it. You can make it bigger until you have complete control over the space between stimulus and response. Let me explain how emotion actually works at a physiological level. When something happens that you perceive as threatening or significant, your amygdala fires. Your body goes into a state of arousal. Your cortisol and adrenaline spike. Your heart rate increases. You're in fight, flight, or freeze mode. This is your nervous system's survival response, and it's incredibly fast. Faster than conscious thought, which is why it feels automatic. It feels like you have no choice. It feels like you're hardwired to react a certain way. But here's the thing. That initial reaction isn't actually your final choice. Your body does its thing. Your amygdala fires. Your nervous system gets activated. But you have the capacity to override it. You have the capacity to observe what's happening in your body and choose a different response. The challenge is that most people never learn to do that. So the initial reaction becomes the final response. They're at the mercy of their nervous system. They're reactive.
But the person who's learned to observe their nervous system activation, who's learned to take a breath and activate their prefrontal cortex, who's learned to choose a response instead of being controlled by a reaction, that person has power. So here's the architecture. First, you need awareness. You need to notice when your nervous system is activated. You need to notice the physical sensations, your jaw clenching, your face getting hot, your chest tightening, your breathing getting shallow. These are signals that your nervous system is activated. Most people don't even notice these signals. They're just reacting unconsciously. But once you notice them, once you're aware, you have the possibility of choosing something different. Second, you need to interrupt the pattern. The moment you notice the activation, you can interrupt it. You can take a deep breath. You can count backward from 10. You can change your physical position. You can move your body. You can do anything that interrupts the automatic pattern. This is where the 3-second rule comes in. You've heard me talk about expanding the gap between stimulus and response. Well, here's how you start. You take one deliberate breath the moment you notice activation. That's 1 second. That's all it takes to begin interrupting the pattern.
The breath is incredibly powerful because it directly activates your parasympathetic nervous system. It tells your body, hey, we're not actually in danger. Calm down. It counteracts the fight, flight, or freeze response. Third, once you've interrupted the pattern, you can choose your response. Now your prefrontal cortex is back online. Now you're thinking clearly. Now you can ask yourself, what do I actually want here? What's my goal? What response will move me toward that goal? Maybe your goal is to maintain the relationship, in which case your response will be different than if your goal is to assert a boundary. Maybe your goal is to win the negotiation, in which case your response will be strategic instead of emotional. Maybe your goal is to learn something, in which case your response will be curious instead of defensive. The point is, once you've created that gap, once you've interrupted the automatic pattern, you get to choose. And that choice is power. Now here's the thing about building this capacity. It's not done in crisis situations. It's done in practice. It's done in small moments. It's done in training. This is why I'm going to introduce you to the Nervous System Training Protocol. This is something that elite performers, military personnel, and high-level athletes use to train their nervous system to stay calm under pressure. Here's how it works. You deliberately expose yourself to controlled stress. You take cold showers. You do ice baths. You do intense exercise. You do breathing exercises. You meditate. You do public speaking. You put yourself in situations that activate your nervous system slightly, and then you practice staying calm in those situations. What this does is it builds your capacity. It trains your nervous system to recognize that activation doesn't mean danger. It trains you to stay calm when you're activated. It expands your capability. Think about a firefighter. They're not naturally calm in a burning building. They've been trained. They've practiced. They've deliberately exposed themselves to high-stress situations in controlled settings. So when the real crisis happens, their nervous system already knows how to function in that state. You can do the same thing. Cold showers aren't fun, but they train your nervous system to stay calm when you're uncomfortable. Intense exercise trains your nervous system to stay composed when you're under physical stress. Meditation trains your nervous system to observe activation without being controlled by it. And these practices compound. After a few months of consistent practice, you'll notice that situations that used to trigger you don't trigger you as much anymore. Your baseline calm will increase. Your tolerance for stress will expand. You'll be harder to shake. Now, I want to talk about something specific. The pause protocol. This is a simple technique that you can use in any moment to regain control. When something triggers you, when you feel activated, instead of reacting, you do this. You pause. You take a deep breath in through your nose for a count of 4. You hold it for a count of 4. You exhale through your mouth for a count of 4. That's it. That single pause, that single breath, that single moment of interruption can completely change the outcome. Because in that moment, you've given your prefrontal cortex time to come back online. You've given yourself the ability to choose instead of react. I want you to practice this today, right now. Take a moment and do the 4-4-4 breath.
Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. Feel how that changes your state. Feel how your nervous system calms down. That's the power you have access to all the time, in any moment. You just have to remember to use it. Here's another component of the architecture of emotional control: your environment. The people you're around, the content you consume, the physical space you're in. All of this affects your emotional state and your ability to maintain control. If you're constantly around chaotic people, if you're constantly consuming triggering content, if you're in a stressed environment, your nervous system is going to be in a heightened state of activation. It's going to be harder to maintain control. But if you curate your environment, if you're around calm people, if you consume nourishing content, if you're in a supportive environment, your baseline activation level will be lower. It'll be easier to maintain control. So part of the architecture is environmental design. You're not just working on your internal state. You're also designing your external circumstances to support the state you want to maintain. This means, who are you spending time with? Are they elevating your state or decreasing it? What content are you consuming? Is it valuable or is it feeding fear and anxiety? Where are you spending your time? Is it a place that supports your growth or detracts from it? Answer those questions honestly, and then make adjustments. Remove the people, content, and environments that are dragging you down. Add the people, content, and environments that elevate you. This is part of the architecture of emotional control. It's not just about what happens internally. It's about designing your life so that you're in a state of calm, confidence, and control most of the time. So that when challenges do come up, you're not already maxed out. You have capacity to handle them. Finally, I want to talk about the mindset component, because the architecture of emotional control includes how you think about emotion. Stop thinking of emotion as something that happens to you. Start thinking of it as data. Emotion is information. Anger is telling you that a boundary has been crossed. Fear is telling you that something matters. Sadness is telling you that you've experienced a loss that needs to be processed. Once you shift to seeing emotion as data, you can be curious about it instead of being controlled by it. You can ask, what is this emotion telling me? What's the underlying message? What do I need to do based on this information? That shift alone will transform your relationship with emotion. You're no longer at the mercy of it. You're using it as information. So here's the full architecture of emotional control. Number 1, build awareness of your nervous system state. Notice the signals. Number 2, interrupt the automatic pattern with breathing, movement, or other techniques. Number 3, create a gap between stimulus and response. In that gap, choose your response deliberately. Number 4, train your nervous system through deliberate practice and exposure to controlled stress. Number 5, use the pause protocol to interrupt patterns in real time. Number 6, design your environment to support the state you want to maintain. Number 7, shift your mindset about emotion from something that happens to you to data that informs you. Master these 7 components, and you'll have the architecture of emotional control. You'll feel your emotions fully, but you'll maintain your power. You'll experience the intensity of life, but you won't be controlled by it. And that's when you become truly dangerous. Now that you've learned the architecture, we need to talk about how to apply it in the most important domain, the room. Because controlling your emotions is one thing. Controlling the room is another. Let's move to Chapter 6, How Quiet People Control the Room. Chapter 6, How Quiet People Control the Room. There's a specific energy that quiet people have. When they walk into a room, things change. The temperature shifts, the dynamic shifts. People start paying attention. And it has nothing to do with what they say. It has everything to do with their presence. Presence is the feeling of being fully there, of being grounded, of being unshakable, of being completely comfortable with who you are and what you're doing. Most people don't have presence. Most people are half in the room and half in their heads. They're worried about what people think of them. They're trying to make a good impression. They're performing. But the person with presence, they're just there. They're not performing. They're not trying to convince anyone of anything. They're just fully, completely present. And that presence commands respect without a word being spoken. Let me explain how this works. Human beings are incredibly sophisticated at reading nonverbal communication. We pick up on tiny signals, a slight tension in the jaw, a micro-expression, a change in breathing. Our brains are processing all of this information constantly. When you're anxious, when you're trying to convince someone, when you're seeking approval, all of that shows up in your body. People see it, they feel it, and it makes them uncomfortable. It signals weakness. But when you're calm, when you're grounded, when you're completely comfortable with yourself, that also shows up in your body. It signals strength. It signals that you're untouchable. It makes people want to follow you. So the first component of controlling the room is presence. And presence is built on self-acceptance. It's built on being completely okay with who you are. Now, here's the thing. You don't have to like yourself to have presence. You don't have to think you're perfect. You just have to be okay with who you are. You have to have made peace with your flaws. You have to not be seeking external validation to feel acceptable. Once you've done that work internally, once you've made that peace, it shows up externally. Your presence becomes palpable. The second component is listening. This might seem counterintuitive. I'm talking about controlling the room, and I'm saying the key is listening. But here's the thing. The person who listens most in a room becomes the most influential. Here's why. When you listen, you're gathering information. You're learning how people think. You're understanding their motivations. You're seeing their fears. While everyone else is performing, you're studying, and that information becomes power. Also, people like being listened to. It's rare. Most people are not listened to. So when someone actually listens, really listens, that person stands out. That person is remembered. That person gains influence. The quiet person is the greatest listener. They don't interrupt. They don't wait for their turn to talk. They're actually paying attention. And in a world where nobody's listening, that's a superpower. The third component is stillness. The person who controls the room doesn't fidget. They don't move unnecessarily. They don't have nervous energy. They have stillness. And that stillness commands attention. Think about it. If you're in a meeting and someone's bouncing their leg or playing with their phone or constantly moving, what does that signal? Nervousness, anxiety, lack of confidence. But the person who sits still, who's completely composed, who's not moving unless they have a reason to move, that person commands respect. That person's stillness is powerful. The fourth component is strategic speech. Remember, the quiet person speaks rarely, but when they do speak, they speak with intention. They don't fill space. They don't ramble. They say something meaningful, and then they're quiet again. What this does is it makes their words valuable. When the quiet person speaks, people listen, because the quiet person doesn't say things lightly. The quiet person thinks before they speak. The quiet person says things that matter. So in a meeting, the quiet person might listen for 30 minutes without saying anything, and then they say one sentence. That one sentence is more influential than everything everyone else said combined, because it came from careful observation and clear thinking. The fifth component is mystery. When you don't reveal everything about yourself, when you're not transparent about your thoughts and feelings, you become mysterious. and mystery is magnetic. People want to understand you, they want to figure you out, they fill the gaps with their imagination, and often their imagination is more powerful than the reality. So by staying somewhat mysterious, by not oversharing, you actually increase your influence. This doesn't mean being rude or cold. It means being friendly but private. It means sharing what's relevant to the situation, but not sharing everything. It means letting people wonder about you a little bit. The sixth component is strategic positioning. The person who controls the room is often physically positioned in a way that gives them advantage. They might be standing while others are sitting. They might be positioned where they can see the whole room. They might be near the entrance or the center of the room. These small physical things matter. They affect how people perceive you and how much influence you have. The seventh component is absolutely critical, and it's calmness in the face of emotion. Other people's emotion, conflict, tension. The person who controls the room doesn't get pulled into it. They stay calm. They stay grounded. And that calmness becomes the anchor for everyone else. When someone gets angry, when someone gets upset, the person who controls the room doesn't match their energy. They stay calm. And what happens? The person's anger starts to diffuse.
They start to come down because there's nobody to push against. There's no resistance. There's just calm. This is incredibly powerful in conflict situations, in negotiations, in difficult conversations. The person who stays calm while the other person is escalating has all the power. Now, let me give you some practical examples of how this plays out. You're in a business meeting. You're pitching an idea. You have two ways you could approach this. Option 1. You're excited about the idea. You talk fast. You explain all the benefits. You try to convince everyone. Your energy is high. Your desperation is showing. Option 2. You calmly explain the idea. You present the facts. You ask if there are questions. You're unbothered by whether people are interested or not. You're not trying to convince anyone. You're just presenting. Which version commands more respect? Option 2. Every single time. Because option 2 comes from a place of strength. You don't need them to agree. You're fine either way. That strength is magnetic. Or think about a social situation. You walk into a room where you don't know many people. You could approach it anxiously, trying to make connections, talking a lot, trying to impress people. Or you could approach it with quiet confidence. You could be friendly, but not needy. You could listen more than you talk. You could be the person who asks questions and seems genuinely interested. Which approach attracts better people? The second one. Because you're not desperate. You're not performing. You're just present and interested. That's attractive. Here's another example. Someone challenges you. Someone questions your authority or your competence. You could respond defensively, explaining why they're wrong, getting emotional. Or you could respond with calm presence. You could take a second. You could acknowledge what they said. You could calmly explain your position if needed. You could look them in the eye and let them see that nothing they say is going to shake you. Which response commands more respect? The second one. Because you've just demonstrated that you're not easily shaken, that you're secure in yourself, that you have nothing to prove. Now I want to give you something very specific that the best room controllers in the world do. They use what I call the power pause. Here's how it works. Someone asks you a question. Your instinct is to answer immediately. But instead, You pause. You take a breath. You look like you're thinking. And then you answer thoughtfully. What does that pause do? It signals that you take the question seriously. It signals that you're thinking carefully. It signals that you're not reactive. It makes your answer seem more authoritative and considered. This is something salespeople use. A customer asks the price. Instead of blurting it out immediately, the salesperson pauses, takes a breath, looks like they're thinking, and then they answer. That pause makes the price seem more justified, more considered. You can use this in any situation. Someone challenges you. Pause. Take a breath. Think. Then respond. That pause is powerful. Here's another thing about controlling the room. It's about managing the narrative. The person who tells the story controls the narrative. The person who controls the narrative has power. So the quiet person, the person who controls the room, is often the person who's asking questions. They're letting other people tell the story, and in hearing the story, they're learning. But also, they're shaping the narrative by what they choose to ask about and what they choose to ignore. This is particularly powerful in group settings. If you want to control the conversation, you don't dominate it. You ask questions. You let other people talk. But you're directing the conversation based on what you choose to ask about. You're shaping how people think. Finally, I want to talk about the visual component. How you dress, how you hold yourself, how you present yourself matters. The person who controls the room usually has a consistent look. They're put together. They're not trying too hard, but they're clearly intentional about how they present themselves. This signals respect for yourself and for the people around you. It signals that you take things seriously. It signals that you're in control. So pay attention to these things. How do you dress? Are you reflecting your intention, or are you just grabbing whatever's clean? How do you hold yourself? Are you sitting up straight and composed, or are you slouched? How do you present yourself? Are you confident, or are you seeking approval? All of these things matter. All of these things affect how people perceive you and how much influence you have. Master these components, and you'll walk into any room and the energy will shift. You won't need to do anything special. Your presence will do the work. Your quiet confidence will command respect. People will want to follow you. That's the power of controlling the room without saying a word. Now that you understand how to control the room, we need to talk about a bigger picture. We need to talk about how this translates into actual wealth and power in your life. Let's move to Chapter 7, The Wealth of Restraint. Chapter 7, The Wealth of Restraint. Here's something that's almost universally true among wealthy and successful people. They don't talk about their moves. They don't announce their plans. They don't share their goals. They don't post about their wins. They operate in silence. And by the time people find out what they've done, it's already done. Meanwhile, broke and struggling people do the opposite. They announce their goals on social media. They tell everyone their plans. They talk about what they're going to do. And then, for various reasons, they don't do it. Or they do it, but they've lost the power because they've already told everyone about it. There's a specific principle here, and it's about restraint creating wealth. When you keep quiet about what you're doing,
you maintain multiple advantages. First, you maintain the element of surprise. By the time people know what you're doing, you've already executed. You've already moved. You've already gotten ahead. And now they're reacting to your move instead of preparing for it or interfering with it. In business, this is critical. If you're planning to launch a new product and you tell everyone in advance, what happens? Your competitors start working on something similar. Your customers start holding off to see if you'll discount it. The media starts writing skeptical pieces. Everyone's got time to prepare a counter move. But if you stay silent, if you build in the shadows, if you don't announce until you launch, what happens? You've already got market penetration. You've already got customers. You've already got momentum. Now your competitors are playing catch-up. Second, you avoid the energy drain of everyone's opinions. The moment you tell people your plan, you're inviting their criticism, their doubt, their skepticism. Even well-meaning people will offer objections. They'll question your idea. They'll tell you it's not going to work. And that energy is draining. By staying silent, you preserve your own conviction. You don't have to fight other people's doubt. You don't have to defend your idea. You just execute. And then once it's done, once the results are there, you can handle whatever anyone says, because the results speak. Third, you maintain your strategic flexibility. When you've announced your plan, you've somewhat committed to it publicly. People are watching. People are expecting something specific. You lose the flexibility to adjust, to pivot, to take a different approach. But when you're silent, you have complete flexibility. You can adjust your approach based on what you learn. You can pivot if something better comes along. You can refine based on actual market feedback instead of based on what you promised people you'd do. Fourth, you maintain the ability to frame the narrative. When you announce your plan in advance, other people get to comment on it, critique it, shape the conversation about it before it even exists. By the time it launches, the narrative's already been set. But when you stay silent and execute, you get to launch and tell the story. You get to frame it. You get to control the narrative from the beginning. That's incredibly powerful. Now, let me be specific about what staying silent means. It doesn't mean not talking to anyone. It means being strategic about who you talk to. You might tell your closest advisor or your business partner, but you're not telling casual acquaintances. You're not posting about it on social media. You're not making announcements. You're keeping it private. You're keeping it tight. And you're moving. Here's a real-world example. Someone wants to start a business. They could announce it. They could tell everyone, "I'm starting a business. Here's my idea. Here's my timeline." And then they spend the next 6 months getting feedback, defending their idea, listening to doubts, and losing momentum. Or they could stay silent. They could build the business quietly. They could get their first customers. They could refine their offering. They could get proof of concept. And then, when they have something real, they can announce it. At that point, they're not asking for permission. They're not asking for feedback. They're just informing people of something that's already happening. Which approach is more powerful? Which approach is more likely to succeed? The second one. This principle extends to everything: your personal growth, your fitness journey,
your relationship,
your financial goals. When you keep quiet about it, you maintain power. When you announce it, you lose power. There's actually research on this. It's called the goal commitment hypothesis. When you announce your goal to other people, your brain feels like you've already accomplished it. You get a little hit of dopamine from the social approval, and that reduces your actual motivation to do the work. But when you keep quiet, when you stay silent about your goals, there's no social reward for just announcing it. So your brain stays in drive mode. You stay hungry. You stay focused. And you actually accomplish the goal. So here's what this means for wealth. Wealthy people stay silent about their goals. You don't know what they're building toward because they don't tell you. They're deals. You don't know about the acquisition until it's done. They're wins. You don't know they hit a financial milestone until long after they've already integrated it and moved on to the next thing. They're problems. You don't know when they're struggling because they don't broadcast it, their timeline. You don't know when they plan to make their moves, their methods. You don't know how they're thinking about things because they don't explain their process. They maintain this silence not because they're unfriendly or aloof, but because they understand that every word is currency. Every piece of information is an asset, and you don't give away assets. Meanwhile, broke people are doing the opposite. They're sharing everything. They're talking about what they want to do. They're posting about their goals. They're complaining about their problems. They're explaining their struggles. They're giving away all their information for free. And what does that get them? Momentary social connection, maybe. But it gets them outcompeted. People steal their ideas. People sabotage them subtly. People get in front of them, and they never understand why they keep losing. It's because they've given away their power through oversharing. Now, there's another component to the wealth of restraint, and it's about what you choose to spend your money on and what you choose to display. Rich people tend to spend money on things that aren't visible, on experiences, on education, on investments, on things that compound value. Meanwhile, poor people display their money through visible consumption. Expensive clothes, expensive cars, expensive jewelry, things that depreciate and things that signal to everyone that they have money. What's the difference? One builds wealth, the other consumes it. When you display your wealth, you're putting a target on yourself. You're inviting jealousy. You're inviting theft. You're inviting people trying to get close to you for your money. You're making yourself a victim. But when you maintain restraint, when you keep your wealth private, when you look normal, when you don't display it, you avoid all of that. You get to operate freely. Nobody's trying to attack you or steal from you. Nobody's manipulating you for your resources. This extends to information about your wealth. You don't tell people how much money you make. You don't tell them about your investments. You don't tell them about your deals. You keep it private. Here's why. If people know you have money, they come asking for it. If they know you have connections, they come asking for favors. If they know you have opportunities, they come trying to get access. You create a constant demand on your resources and your time. But if people think you're just a regular person, they leave you alone. You get to operate freely. You get to build without people constantly trying to benefit from your position. This is why truly wealthy people often look like they're not wealthy. They might drive a used car. They might wear regular clothes. They might live in a normal house. Not because they're cheap, but because they're strategic. They know that displaying wealth is a liability. Now, here's the thing about restraint and information. The person who knows the most and says the least has ultimate advantage. They know what's happening. They know people's motivations. They know the landscape, but nobody knows what they know. And that information asymmetry is valuable. It's the foundation of power. Imagine a negotiation. One person comes prepared. They know the other person's constraints. They know the market. They know alternatives. But they don't reveal what they know. They ask questions that seem innocent. They listen. They gather more information. The other person, meanwhile, is revealing everything. They're explaining their situation. They're telling their story. They're giving away their information. Who has power in that negotiation? The person who knows more and reveals less every single time. So the wealth of restraint is about understanding that your silence, your secrecy about your plans and your progress is an asset. It's something valuable. It's something worth maintaining. The moment you lose that restraint, the moment you start sharing everything, you lose that advantage. And once you lose the advantage, you lose power. And power is what determines wealth and success. Now that you understand the wealth of restraint, we need to talk about how to apply this in the most critical moments. We need to talk about how to maintain your power when chaos is happening all around you. Let's move to Chapter 8, Unshakable in the Face of Chaos. Chapter 8, Unshakable in the Face of Chaos. There are moments in life when everything falls apart, when the market crashes, when you lose a client, when a relationship ends, when you face a health crisis, when a deal collapses, when plans get disrupted. These are moments of real chaos. And in these moments, most people panic. They make reactive decisions. They look to other people to tell them what to do. They lose their mind, and their panic makes the situation worse. But the person who's unshakable, the person who's built real discipline, they don't panic. They don't make emotional decisions. They don't lose their composure. They stay calm. They think clearly, and they respond strategically. And that's when they separate themselves from everyone else. Let me talk about why calm is so valuable in chaos. When you're calm, your prefrontal cortex is online. You can think. You can strategize. You can see options that panicked people can't see. You can make decisions that move you forward instead of backward. When you're panicked, your amygdala is in charge. You're in survival mode. You're making fight, flight, or freeze decisions. You're not thinking strategically. You're just reacting, and those reactions usually make things worse. So the person who stays calm in chaos has a massive advantage. They get to think while everyone else is panicking. They get to strategize while everyone else is reacting. They get to make intelligent moves while everyone else is making emotional moves. And over time, that advantage compounds. The person who stayed calm and made good decisions during the crisis is ahead of everyone else when the crisis ends. Here's a specific example. The market crashes. Everyone panics. Everyone's selling. Everyone's losing money. Most people are also making bad decisions based on fear. They're pulling money out. They're cutting investments. They're sabotaging their long-term plans because of short-term panic. But the calm person, they don't panic. They look at the situation logically. They see that things are on sale. They see opportunity. And instead of selling, they're buying. They're investing while everyone else is running. Fast forward 5 years, the market recovers. The person who panicked is back to where they started or worse. But the person who stayed calm and invested during the crash, they're way ahead. That's the power of staying calm in chaos. You don't just survive, you get stronger, you get ahead. Now, I want to talk about how this applies in real-time crisis situations. When something immediately bad happens, you need to respond. A customer calls with a major complaint. An employee quit. A shipment got lost. Something went wrong. The person who panics will make it worse. The person who stays calm will contain it. Here's the protocol. When you get bad news or when something goes wrong, your first instinct will be to panic. You'll feel that activation in your nervous system. And in that moment, you do not make any decisions. You do not take any action. You simply pause. You take that breath. You activate your pause protocol. You let the news settle. And then you think, what is actually happening? What are my options? What's the best response? Often, the best response is to get more information before you do anything. You don't react. You ask questions. You understand the situation. And then you respond. This simple practice, pausing before responding to bad news, will change your life. Because every time you do it, you're preventing yourself from making an emotional decision that makes things worse. In business, this is critical. If a customer complains, your instinct might be to defend yourself or your product. But the best response is to listen.
To understand what happened. To show that you care about fixing it. And then to fix it. That's so much more effective than getting defensive and losing the customer. In relationships, when someone brings up a problem, your instinct might be to defend yourself or attack back. But the best response is to listen, to understand what they're experiencing, to take it seriously, and then to work on it together. The person who can do that, the person who can stay calm when someone's upset with them, is the person who builds strong relationships. Now, I want to talk about something that's related to staying calm in chaos, and that's handling criticism and failure. Because criticism and failure often feel like chaos. They feel like a threat, and your nervous system activates. But the person who's unshakable doesn't take failure or criticism personally. They see it as data. They extract whatever useful information is there, and then they move on. Someone criticizes your work. Instead of being upset, instead of being defensive, you think, is there truth in this? Can I learn something? If yes, you learn it. If no, you discard it. Either way, you're unbothered. Someone's upset with you. Instead of matching their emotion, instead of getting defensive, you stay calm. You listen. You understand what they're experiencing, and you respond strategically based on what you actually want to accomplish. Someone fails. Instead of making it mean something about their worth, instead of spiraling, they see it as information. The approach didn't work. What's the next approach? What did we learn? What's the adjustment? This is the mindset of the unshakable person. Everything is data. Everything is feedback. Nothing is a personal attack. Nothing is a catastrophe. It's just information that helps you recalibrate and move forward. Here's something that strengthens this ability. Deliberate exposure to difficulty. You don't wait for chaos to happen to learn how to respond to it. You practice. You deliberately put yourself in mildly difficult situations. You practice staying calm. Cold showers, ice baths, difficult conversations, public speaking, intense exercise, meditation in uncomfortable positions. All of these things are training for your mind and your nervous system. You're building the capacity to stay calm when things are hard. And when real chaos comes, you'll have that capacity built. You'll know how to respond because you've practiced. I want to give you a specific visualization that's used by high-level performers and military personnel. It's called scenario visualization. Here's how it works. You think about a scenario that could go wrong. A critical presentation where technology fails. A difficult conversation with someone you care about. A business crisis. A failure of some kind. You visualize it in detail. You see it happening. And then you visualize yourself responding calmly. You visualize staying composed. You visualize thinking clearly. You visualize responding strategically. You run through the scenario, and in your visualization, you handle it with calm and clarity. The brain doesn't distinguish between visualization and reality. So when you practice responding calmly in your mind, you're training your nervous system to respond calmly in real life. When the actual scenario happens, it feels familiar. You've already handled it in your mind. Elite athletes do this. They visualize themselves winning. They visualize their performance. And then when it comes time to perform, it feels like they've already done it. You can do the same thing with handling chaos. Visualize the chaos. Visualize yourself staying calm. Visualize yourself thinking clearly. Visualize yourself responding strategically. And when real chaos comes, you'll be ready. Now, here's the final thing I want to talk about in this chapter. And it's about what unshakable people do in crisis that most people don't. When crisis hits, most people look outward. They look to other people to tell them what to do. They look to experts. They look to the media. They look for certainty from external sources. But unshakable people look inward. They ask themselves, what do I know? What can I control? What's within my power? And they focus on that. They don't waste energy on things they can't control. They don't look to other people for validation or direction. They trust their own judgment. They trust their own ability to figure things out. And they move based on that. This is where the power comes from. It's not about having all the answers. It's about having the confidence to figure things out. It's about having the self-trust to not need someone else to tell you what's right. And that self-trust is built through small victories, through times when you handled a difficult situation and it worked out, through times when you made a decision and it was right, through times when you stayed calm and it paid off. Each of those builds your confidence in yourself. Each of those builds your capacity to trust yourself. And that trust is what makes you unshakable. So when chaos comes, you're not looking for someone to rescue you. You're looking inward. You're asking yourself, what's my best move? And then you make that move. And you trust that you'll figure it out. That's the power of the unshakable person. Now that you understand how to be unshakable in the face of chaos, we need to talk about the bigger picture. We need to talk about how intention moves you forward in life. Let's move to Chapter 9, the discipline of intent. Chapter 9. The discipline of intent. Most people move through their lives reactively. Something happens, and they respond. Someone asks something of them, and they do it. An opportunity comes up, and they take it. They're not driving their life. Life is driving them. But the person who operates with intention is different. They decide what they want. They decide what moves them toward it. And they do that. Everything else is irrelevant. This is the discipline of intent. And it's one of the most powerful forces in human development. Let me explain what I mean. Intent is the clear decision about what you actually want. Not what you think you should want. Not what other people think you should want. What you actually want. And then it's the commitment to only do things that move you toward that. Most people don't have clear intent. They're confused about what they want. Or they know what they want, but they keep doing things that move them away from it. They say they want to be healthy, but they're eating junk food. They say they want a good relationship, but they're not communicating. They say they want success, but they're not doing the work. But the person with discipline, they know what they want, and they only do things that move them toward it. Everything else they say no to. This requires clarity first. You need to know what you actually want. Not in a vague way, in a specific way. What's the vision? What are the concrete goals? What does success look like? If you're vague about what you want, you'll be vague about what you do. You'll chase every opportunity. You'll be reactive to whatever's in front of you. You'll waste time and energy on things that don't matter. But if you're crystal clear about what you want, you can evaluate everything through that lens. Does this move me toward my goal? Yes? Do it. No? Don't do it. It's simple. Here's an example. Let's say your intent is to build a 7-figure business. Now, every opportunity you're presented with gets evaluated through that lens. Someone asks you to take on a side project. Does it move me toward my goal? No? You say no. Someone invites you to a social event that would take 10 hours. Does it move me toward my goal? No? You say no. But most people don't do this. They say yes to everything. They're busy, but they're not productive. They're doing a lot, but they're not moving toward their goal. The disciplined person is different. The disciplined person has intent. And intent is a filter. It filters out everything that doesn't matter. It lets through everything that does. Now, here's the second component of the discipline of intent. It's about how you spend your most limited resource: time. Time is the one thing you can't make more of. You get 24 hours a day, and that's it. And most people waste it. They scroll social media. They watch TV. They have low-quality conversations. They do work that doesn't matter. But the disciplined person is intentional about time. Every hour is aligned with their intent. If your intent is to build a business, you're not spending 8 hours a day watching Netflix. You're spending it building your business. This sounds obvious, but most people don't actually do it. They claim they want something, but they don't allocate time to it. And time is what determines results. So the discipline of intent includes ruthless time management. You look at how you spend your time and you ask, does this move me toward my intent? If yes, you do more of it. If no, you eliminate it. For many people, this means cutting out a lot of things. Cutting out social media. Cutting out low-quality friendships. Cutting out entertainment that doesn't serve them. Cutting out commitments that don't align with their goal. This can feel harsh. But the person with intent understands, I have limited time, and I'm not going to waste it on things that don't matter. I'm going to spend it on things that move me toward what I actually want. And that focus is what separates people who achieve their goals from people who don't. Now, the third component of the discipline of intent is about decision-making. The person with intent makes decisions differently. Most people make decisions based on what feels good right now, what's comfortable, what's easy, what requires the least effort. And those decisions usually move them away from their intent.
But the person with intent makes decisions based on their intent, not based on what feels good right now, based on what moves them toward what they want. Sometimes these are the same, but often they're not. Often the decision that moves you toward your goal is hard. It's uncomfortable. It requires sacrifice. The person with intent makes it anyway, because they've decided that their goal is more important than their comfort. They've decided that they want the outcome bad enough to pay the price. This is where you see the difference between people who talk about what they want and people who actually achieve it. The people who achieve it are willing to make uncomfortable decisions. The people who talk about it want the outcome, but they're not willing to pay the price. So the discipline of intent requires that you understand your actual values. What do you want enough that you're willing to sacrifice for it? Once you know that, you can make decisions from that place. And those decisions, made consistently, move you toward your goal. Now, the fourth component is about the difference between activity and progress. Most people are busy. They're doing things, but they're not making progress. The disciplined person distinguishes between the two. Activity is just doing stuff. Progress is moving toward your goal. You can be busy without making progress. In fact, you can be very busy while moving away from your goal. So the person with intent tracks progress, not activity. They ask, am I actually moving toward my goal? Is this working? What's the trajectory? And they adjust based on that. If something isn't working, they change it. They don't keep doing it because it's what they've always done. They don't keep doing it because they've invested time in it. They change it because their goal is more important than their ego. This is hard for most people. Most people have sunk cost fallacy. They've invested in something, so they keep doing it, even though it's not working. But the person with intent doesn't have that limitation. They're willing to abandon things that aren't working. They're willing to change course. And that flexibility, combined with clear intent, is incredibly powerful. Now, I want to talk about something that people with strong intent understand, and that's the long-term nature of real goals. If your goal is important enough to be your intent, it probably takes time. It probably takes sustained effort over months or years. And most people give up because they don't see immediate results. But the person with intent understands this. They're not looking for immediate gratification. They're playing the long game. They're making decisions that might not pay off for months or years, but they'll pay off eventually. This is why they can do things that other people won't do. They can sacrifice now for future benefit. They can invest in themselves. They can work on something without seeing immediate results. They can be patient. And that patience, that willingness to play the long game, is what separates people who build real things from people who stay stuck. Now, here's something important about intent that most people miss. Your intent isn't static. It evolves. As you learn, as you grow, as your circumstances change, your intent might change. And that's okay. The person with discipline doesn't rigidly hold on to an old intent. They're willing to recalibrate. They're willing to change direction if they learn that what they thought they wanted isn't actually what they want. But they still operate with intent. It's just that the intent is updated based on new information. So the discipline of intent is this: know what you actually want. Make decisions based on that. Spend your time on things that move you toward it. Track progress. Be willing to change course if needed, and play the long game. Do that, and you'll move toward your goals much faster than most people. Now that you understand the discipline of intent, we need to talk about how all of this comes together. We need to talk about what happens when you've mastered everything we've discussed. Let's move to Chapter 10, The Life of Unshakable Power. Chapter 10, The Life of Unshakable Power. We've covered a lot of ground in this book. We've talked about the power of saying nothing. We've talked about mastering your reactions. We've talked about sitting with discomfort. We've talked about stopping the need to prove yourself. We've talked about the architecture of emotional control. We've talked about controlling the room. We've talked about the wealth of restraint. We've talked about being unshakable in chaos. And we've talked about the discipline of intent. Now I want to talk about what happens when you integrate all of this. When you've mastered these principles and they become a way of being, what kind of life do you live? What kind of person do you become? The answer is simple. You live a life of unshakable power. Let me describe what that looks like. First, you have control, real control. Not control over circumstances because you can't control those, but control over yourself, control over your emotions, control over your reactions, control over your decisions. When something happens, you don't react emotionally. You pause, you think, you choose your response, and that choice is aligned with your values and your goals. That sounds simple, but it's revolutionary. Because most people don't have that. Most people are reactive. Most people are controlled by their emotions. Most people make decisions they regret because they weren't thinking clearly. But you've built the architecture. You've done the practice. You have control, and that control extends to everything. You control how you spend your time. You control what you say. You control what you commit to. You control what you let affect you. Second, you have respect, real respect. Not the kind you get from being loud or flashy or always being right, but the kind you get from being solid, from being calm, from being capable, from doing what you say you're going to do. People sense that you're different. They sense that you're not desperate. They sense that you're not trying to convince them of anything. They sense that you're secure in yourself. And that's attractive. That's respect-worthy. And once you have that respect, once people know that you're solid, your influence multiplies. People want to work with you. People want to be around you. People want to follow your lead, not because you're demanding it, but because you've earned it. Third, you have clarity. You know what you want. You know what moves you toward it. You know what doesn't. You make decisions quickly because you have a filter. Does this align with my goal? Yes? Do it. No? Don't do it. Most people live in confusion. They're not sure what they want. They're not sure what to do. They're pulled in multiple directions. But you have clarity, and clarity is power. Fourth, you have simplicity because you've eliminated everything that doesn't matter. You've cut out the distractions. You've cut out the low quality. You've cut out the people and activities that don't align with your goal. Your life is simple. Your focus is singular. Your effort is concentrated. Most people are scattered. They're trying to do everything. They're trying to be everything to everyone. They're overwhelmed. But you've simplified. And simplicity creates space for depth, space for mastery, space for real results. Fifth, you have progress, real progress, not activity that looks like progress, but actual movement towards your goal. Every day you're doing things that move you forward. Every month you can see that you've gotten better. Every year you can see the compounding results. Most people are stuck. They're busy, but they're not going anywhere. You're going somewhere. You're building something. You're becoming something. 6, you have freedom. The freedom to not care what everyone thinks. The freedom to make decisions based on your values, not based on other people's expectations. The freedom to change your mind when you learn something new. The freedom to be yourself. This is one of the most underrated aspects of power. Freedom. Not freedom to do whatever you want, but freedom from the desperate need for external validation. Freedom from being controlled by other people's opinions. Freedom to live on your own terms. And that freedom is what comes from everything you've learned in this book. When you master your emotions, you're not controlled by others' words. When you develop the discipline of intent, you're not pulled in directions that don't matter to you. When you understand the power of restraint, you're not desperate to convince anyone of anything. You're free. Now, I want to talk about what happens when you operate from this place of power. What unfolds in your life? First, your relationships get better. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're coming from a healthier place. You're not desperate. You're not needy. You're not trying to convince anyone of your worth. You're secure. And secure people attract other secure people. They repel desperate people. Your relationships become higher quality. Second, your business or career advances, not because you're more talented, but because you're operating from clarity and intent. You're not scattered. You're focused. You're not reacting to every opportunity. You're pursuing things that align with your goal. You're making strategic decisions. You're thinking long-term. And that compounds. Third, your health improves because you're not stressed. You're not operating from a place of fear or desperation. Your nervous system is calm. You're sleeping better. Your body is healing. Your stress hormones are lower. Your immune system is stronger. All the things that were being damaged by stress are now healing. Fourth, your self-image shifts.
You're no longer someone who's struggling, who's desperate, who's trying to figure it out. You're someone who's solid, who's capable, who's moving forward. And that self-image allows you to do more, to risk more, to build more. Fifth, your experience of life changes. Instead of life happening to you, you're shaping your life. Instead of reacting to circumstances, you're creating them. Instead of survival mode, you're in creation mode. Instead of fear, you're in possibility. That shift is everything. Now, I want to be clear about something. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy. You'll still face challenges. You'll still experience difficulties. You'll still have things go wrong. That's part of life. But you'll handle them differently. You'll stay calm. You'll think clearly. You'll respond strategically. You'll learn from them. And you'll keep moving. That's the difference. Also, becoming this person, building this power, it requires consistent practice. It's not a one-time thing. It's something you build through daily choices, daily pauses, daily decisions to not react emotionally, daily commitment to your intent, daily practice of your discipline. But here's the beautiful thing. The more you practice, the more automatic it becomes. At first, it takes effort. You have to remind yourself to pause. You have to consciously choose not to react. You have to work to maintain your discipline. But over months and years, it becomes your default. You pause automatically. You respond strategically automatically. Your discipline is just how you operate. And at that point, you're not forcing anything. You're just being. You're just living from this place of power naturally. Now, I want to talk about what this means for your future. Because once you've built this foundation, once you've mastered these principles, everything becomes possible. You can build the business you want. You can create the relationships you want. You can pursue the goals that matter to you. Not because you're better than other people, but because you operate from a different place. A place of clarity, discipline, and power. And that's magnetic. That attracts resources. That attracts opportunities. That attracts the right people. Things start moving in your direction because you've become someone that things move toward. This is how empires are built. This is how lives are transformed. Not through lucky breaks or special circumstances, but through the discipline to master yourself. The discipline to control your emotions. The discipline to stay silent until it's time to speak. The discipline to do what needs to be done, regardless of how you feel. That discipline compounds. Over years, it creates a life that most people can't even imagine. A life of real power. A life of real freedom. A life of real impact. And that's available to you, right now, starting today. Now, I want to talk about your challenge, because knowing all of this is one thing. Doing it is another. The question isn't whether you understand these principles. The question is, will you actually live them? Will you, tomorrow, when you feel the urge to explain yourself, pause instead and say nothing? Will you, when someone challenges you, resist the need to defend and stay calm? Will you, when discomfort arises, sit with it instead of filling it with noise? Will you, when you're anxious about something, practice your discipline instead of seeking reassurance? Will you, every single day, make decisions based on your intent instead of based on what feels good in the moment? Will you commit to the daily practice of building the architecture of emotional control? Will you, in small moments, practice the pause protocol? Practice staying silent. Practice staying calm. Practice choosing your response instead of reacting. These are the questions, because these are what separate people who change their lives from people who stay the same. People who read this book and think it's interesting, and then they go back to their old patterns. And people who read this book and actually commit to changing how they operate.
You get to choose which one you are. If you choose to change, if you commit to practicing these principles, if you show up every day and do the work, your life will transform. Not overnight, but over months and years, you'll become someone different. Someone who operates from power instead of desperation. Someone who creates instead of reacts. Someone who builds instead of consumes. And that transformation is available to you right now. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to choose one principle from this book. Just one. And I want you to practice it for the next 30 days. Master the power of saying nothing. Or master the 3-second pause before you react. Or practice sitting with discomfort for just 30 seconds when it arises. Pick one, and for 30 days, practice it daily. Notice what changes. Notice how you feel. Notice how people respond to you differently.
After 30 days, you'll see that this works. You'll see that you have more power than you thought. And then you'll be ready to add the next principle, and the next, and the next. That's how you build. That's how you transform. Not all at once, but consistently. One principle at a time. And the person you become, the life you build, the power you develop, that's something nobody can take from you. Because it's not based on external circumstances. It's based on your internal discipline. That's the foundation of unshakable power.
Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for being willing to think deeply about these principles. Thank you for being interested in transforming your life. The work is yours now. The choice is yours now. What you do with what you've learned, that's up to you. But I'm telling you, this works. This framework works. Master your emotions. Control your reactions. Build your discipline. And everything else follows. I believe in you. Now believe in yourself. And let's go build something real. Here's what just happened. You learned that the most powerful people in your life aren't the loudest. They're the quietest. You learned that every reaction you make is a choice to give away your power. You learned that silence isn't weakness. It's psychological armor. You learned that words are currency, and you've been bankrupt. You learned that discipline isn't about feeling less. It's about feeling everything and choosing your response anyway. You learned that the observer always has advantage over the performer. You learned that restraint builds wealth and respect in ways that bragging never will. You learned that your calm in chaos becomes the foundation of unshakable influence. And most importantly, you learned that all of this is available to you right now. But here's the brutal truth. Knowing and doing are not the same thing. Most people will forget everything they just heard within 24 hours. But not you. You're going to do something different. Tomorrow, when you feel the urge to explain yourself, you're going to pause and say nothing. When criticism comes, you're not going to defend, you're going to listen and extract the data. When discomfort arises, you're not going to fill the silence with words. You're going to sit with it. This is how you build unshakable discipline, not in big moments, in small ones. The question isn't whether you can do this. The question is, will you? That's your challenge. Your move.